A student's overview of the Ageless wisdom was carefully compiled from the following books by Alice A. Bailey. A Treatise on Cosmic Fire. Esoteric Psychology, Volumes 1 and 2. Esoteric Healing. Esoteric Astrology. The Rays and the Initiations. Students are encouraged to download the free PDF version of this overview by following the link in the video's description, or to order a printed copy at cost from thebookpatch.com, but are advised to read the original, unabridged books in order to gain deeper insight into the ageless wisdom. Students are also invited to join our online study group at facebook.com/groups/students of the ageless wisdom. Chapter 35, Esoteric Psychology Volume 2. The Law of Magnetic Impulse. Esoteric name, the Law of Polar Union. Symbol, 2 fiery balls and triangle. Ray energy, radiator energy, second ray manifesting. It would be well to remember that we are not considering here that aspect of the second ray which is peculiarly concerned with form, and which constitutes the cohering, magnetic agent in any form, whether atom, man or solar system. This law of magnetic impulse governs the relation, the interplay, the intercourse, and the interpenetration between the 7 groups of souls on the higher levels of the mental plane which constitute the first of the major form differentiations. These we can only study intelligently from the angle of the 7 ray groups, as they compose the spiritual aspect of the human family. This law governs also the relationships between souls, who, whilst in manifestation through form, are en rapport with each other. It is a law, therefore, which concerns the interrelation of all souls within the periphery of what the Christians call the kingdom of God. Through a right understanding of this law, the man arrives at a knowledge of his subjective life. He can wield power subjectively, and thus work consciously in form and with form, yet holding his polarization and his consciousness in another dimension, and functioning actively behind the scenes. This law concerns those inner esoteric activities which are not primarily related to form life. This law is of major importance because of the fact that deity itself is on the second ray, because this is a second ray solar system, and therefore all rays and the varying states or groupings of consciousness, and all forms, in or out of physical manifestation, are colored and dominated by this ray, and therefore again finally controlled by this law. The law of magnetic impulse is in the soul realm what the law of attraction is in the world of phenomena. This law governs also the relation of the soul of a group to the soul of other groups. It governs the interplay, vital but unrealized yet as a potency, between the soul of the 4th kingdom in nature, the human, and the soul of the 3 subhuman kingdoms, and likewise that of the 3 superhuman kingdoms. Just as certain human beings have, through meditation, discipline and service, most definitely made a contact with their own souls, and can therefore become channels for soul expression, and mediums for the distribution into the world of soul energy, so men and women, who are oriented to soul living in their aggregate, form a group of souls, en rapport with the source of spiritual supply. End of page 176. The Law of Service. Esoteric name, the Law of Water and the Fishes. Symbol, a man with a pot of water. Ray energy, outpouring energy, 6th ray, vivifying life. It has previously been pointed out that the three great sciences which will come to the fore in the New Age, and which will lead humanity from the unreal to the real, and from aspiration to realization are: 1. The science of meditation, the coming science of the mind. 2. The science of antakarana, or of the bridging which must take place between higher and lower mind. 3. The science of service, which is a definite technique of at-one-ment. Secondly, this law of service is something which may not be escaped. Evasion brings its penalties, if that evasion is conscious. Ability to serve marks a definite stage of advance upon the path, and until that stage is reached, spontaneous service, rendered in love and guided by wisdom, cannot be given. The idea of service is, at this time, the major idea to be grasped, for, in grasping it, we open ourselves wide to the new incoming influences. The law of service is the expression of the energy of a great life, who, in cooperation with Him in whom we live and move and have our being, is subjecting the human family to certain influences and streams of energy which will eventually do three things. 1. Awaken the heart center in all aspirants and disciples. 2. Enable emotionally polarized humanity to focus intelligently in the mind. 3. Transfer the energy of the solar plexus into the heart. This unfolding of what we might call the consciousness of the heart or the development of true feeling is the first step towards group awareness. This group awareness and this identification with the feeling aspect of all groups is the quality which leads to service, a service to be rendered as the Masters render it, and as the Christ demonstrated it for us in Galilee. The law of repulse. Esoteric name, the law of all destroying angels. Symbol, the angel with the flaming sword. Ray energy, the rejecting energy of the first ray. This law has certain characteristics and basic effects which might be briefly enumerated as follows. 1. The energy displayed is dissipating in its effect. This law works as a dispersing agent. 2. When in active expression, it causes an active scattering or rejection of the aspects of form life. 3. It produces a discriminating contact which leads eventually to what is esoterically called the way of divine refusal. 4. It is, nevertheless, an aspect of the law of love, of the Vishnu or Christ aspect, and concerns an attitude of the soul, whose essential nature is love. 5. This law expresses itself through the mind nature, and therefore can only make its presence and influence felt upon the path of discipleship. 6. It is the prime prerequisite to true self-knowledge. It reveals at the same time that it divides or scatters. 7. It works through love and for the interest of the unit, the form and the existence which finally repulses the form. 8. It is an aspect of one of the greatest cosmic laws, the law of the soul, which is the cosmic law of attraction, for that which is attracted in time is automatically and eventually repulsed by that which attracted it in the first instance. End of page 177. This law is one which primarily begins to impress the divine purpose upon the consciousness of the aspirant, and dictates to him those higher impulses and those spiritual decisions which mark his progress upon the path. It is the demonstration of the first ray quality, a sub-ray influence of the second ray, for it should be remembered that to repulse a form, a situation or a condition may be the evidence of spiritual love in the agent of repulsion. This is well pictured for us in the ancient symbol of the angel with the flaming sword, who stands before the gate of paradise to turn away those who seek the fancied security of that shelter and condition. This angel acts in love, and has so acted down the ages, for that state of realization which we call paradise is a place of essential danger for all, save those who have earned the right to sojourn there. 1. The law of sacrifice, the petals of sacrifice. 2. The law of magnetic impulse, the petals of love. 3. The law of service, the petals of knowledge. This fourth law of repulse works through the first law of sacrifice and carries to the aspirant the quality, influence and tendency of the spiritual triad, the threefold expression of the monad. Its full force is felt only after the third initiation, in which the power of the spirit is, for the first time, consciously felt. Up to that time it has been the growing control of the soul which was primarily registered. Therefore we have 1. The law of repulse. Atma. Spiritual will. This fourth law influence comes via the egoic petals of sacrifice and the subsidiary law of sacrifice. 2. The law of group progress. Buddhi. Spiritual love. This fifth law comes via the love petals of the egoic lotus and the subsidiary law of magnetic impulse. 3. The law of expansive response. Manas. Higher spiritual mind. This sixth law comes via the knowledge petals and the subsidiary law of service. These higher spiritual laws reflect themselves in the three lower spiritual laws, finding their way into the lower consciousness via the egoic lotus and the antakarana. This statement is the second basic postulate in connection with our study of this law of repulse, the first postulate being the earlier statement that unless there is a thread of light to act as a channel, that which this law conveys will remain unknown and unrealized. These 6 laws give us the key to the entire psychological problem of every human being, and there is no condition which is not produced by the conscious or unconscious reaction of man to these basic influences, the natural and spiritual laws. The major and minor laws. The 3 major laws are 1. The law of economy, which governs primarily the instinctual nature of man. 2. The law of attraction, which governs the soul aspect in man and in all forms of life, from an atom to a solar system. 3. The law of synthesis, which will govern man when he has arrived at the path of initiation, but which as yet means but little in his development. End of page 178. There are, then, the 7 minor laws which produce the evolutionary unfoldment of man, the person, and man, the soul. These are 1. The law of vibration, the atomic law of the solar system. 2. The law of cohesion, an aspect of the law of attraction. 3. The law of disintegration. 4. The law of magnetic control, governing the control of the personality by the spirit via the soul. 5. The law of fixation. By means of this law the mind controls and stabilizes. 6. The law of love, whereby the lower desire nature is transmuted. 7. the law of sacrifice and death. These 7 laws concern the form side of life. To these 10 laws must be added the 7 laws of the soul which we are here considering. These begin to play upon the man and produce his more rapid spiritual unfoldment after he has been subjected to the discipline of the probationary path, or the path of purification. He is then ready to tread the final stages of the path. These 7 laws are the basis of all true psychological understanding and, when their influence is better grasped, man will arrive at real self-knowledge. He will then be ready for the 4th initiation, which releases him from all further need for rebirth. These 17 degrees prepare the man for the 4th or fundamental degree, taken by a man who is a master mason. It can only be taken when the master is in possession of the true lost word. He has risen from the dead, he has been entered, passed, and raised, and now can be perfected. Herein lies a great mystery. These 17 degrees, leading to the first great step, taken by the risen master, are subjectively related to the 17 laws which we have been considering. There is a parallelism worth noting between 1. The 18 laws. A. The 3 major laws of the universe. B. The 7 minor laws of the solar system. C. The 7 basic laws of the soul, plus what we might call the great law of deity itself, the law of God's synthetic purpose. 2. The 18 subplanes through which man makes his way. A. The 7 physical subplanes. B. The 7 astral or emotional desire subplanes. C. The 4 lower mental subplanes. 3. The 18 degrees in Masonry, from that of the entered apprentice to that of the perfected initiate. Of the Rose Croix chapter. 4. The 18 centers of force with which the spiritual man has to work. A. The 7 centers in the etheric body. B. The 7 centers in the astral body. C. The 3 rows of petals in the egoic lotus. D. The jewel in the lotus, at the heart of the flower of the soul, making the 18th center. An understanding of these symbolic relations will do much to clarify the way of the soul in a body, and will constitute the basis of all true esoteric psychological study. It is this realization of man's fundamental bias or controlling factor that lies behind the teaching given by the Buddha, and which is embodied in the 4 noble truths of the Buddhist philosophy, which can be summarized as follows. End of page 179. The 4 Noble Truths of Buddhism. 1. Existence in the phenomenal universe is inseparable from suffering and sorrow. 2. The cause of suffering is desire for existence in the phenomenal universe. 3. The cessation of suffering is attained by eradicating desire for phenomenal existence. 4. The path to the cessation of suffering is the Noble Eightfold Path. It was the realization of the urgency of man's need to be delivered from his own desire nature which led Christ to emphasize the necessity to seek the good of one's neighbor in contradistinction to one's own good, and to advise the life of service and self-sacrifice, of self-forgetfulness and love of all beings. Only in this way can man's mind and the eye of the heart be turned away from one's own needs and satisfaction to the deeper demands of the race itself. The evolutionary progress of man. The progress of the undeveloped and the average man can be covered by the following statements, taken sequentially and describing the stages of his progress under the promptings of desire. 1. The urge to experience, to exist, and to satisfy the instinctual nature. 2. Experience, grasping, existing, followed by renewed demand for more satisfying compliances of fate or destiny. 3. Cycle after cycle of demand for satisfaction, a period of satisfaction of a temporary nature, and then further demands. This is the story of the race. 4. Experience, steadily sought and pursued upon the three planes of human evolution. 5. Then the same experience, but this time as an integrated personality. 6. Demand met until satiety is reached, for in time all men do eventually achieve that which they demand. 7. Then comes the demand for inner spiritual compliances, happiness and bliss. The heaven wish becomes powerful. 8. A vague realization that two things are needed, purification and the power to choose aright, which is right discrimination. 9. A vision of the pairs of opposites. 10. The realization of the narrow path which leads between these pairs of opposites. 11. Discipleship and the repulsing or repudiation, over a long period of time, of the not-self. The law of repulse is equally difficult of understanding by the disciple as he enters upon the path. He has to learn to recognize its influence, then he must himself learn to do three things. 1. Through service, steadily to decentralize himself and thus begin occultly to repulse the personality. He must see to it that his motive is love for all beings, and not desire for his own release. 2. Through an understanding of the pairs of opposites, he begins, esoterically, to isolate the noble middle path of which the Buddha spoke. 3. Through comprehension of the words of Christ, enjoining men to let their light shine, he begins to construct the path of light which leads to the center of life and guides him out of darkness into light, from the unreal to the real, and from death to immortality. This is the true path of the Antakarana, which the disciple weaves from out of himself, speaking symbolically, just as the spider weaves his thread. Service, an understanding of the way, and the building of the true line of escape, that is the task to be carried forward upon the path of discipleship. Such is the object set before all the students of the esoteric sciences at this time, provided they desire it enough, and can train themselves to work selflessly for their fellow men. As they succeed in doing this and approximate ever more closely to that which is not the pairs of opposites, and thus achieve the central way, steadily the law of repulse begins to swing into operation. When the third initiation is taken, this law will begin to hold the dominant place in the ruling of the life. End of page 180. The way of discrimination, the method of dispassion and the discipline of the life have been made plain and clear by the teachings of the past 2,000 years, and through the many books written to emphasize the teaching of the Christ and of the Buddha. Through a right understanding of these, right choice can be made, and that which should not be cherished or desired can be repulsed. Many an earnest student, such as those who will read this treatise, has found it of advantage to write down for himself his own personal understanding of the four words. 1. Discrimination. 2. Dispassion. 3. Discipline. 4. Decentralization. We shall base our thoughts upon the words earlier quoted. The law of repulse drives in 7 directions, and forces all it thus contacts back to the bosom of the 7 spiritual fathers. We have come definitely to a consideration of the way of repulsion, governed by this law, which is the way or technique for each ray type. Though the same law can be seen working in all 7 cases and in all 7 directions, yet the results will differ, because the quality and the phenomenal appearance upon which the law of the divine will make its impact and consequent impression, differ so widely. The complexity of the problem is therefore great. These 7 soul laws lie behind all the various presentations of truth as they have been given out by the world teachers down the ages. It requires much spiritual insight, however, to enable the average disciple to see the correspondence or the trend of ideas which link, for instance, 1. The Beatitudes, enunciated by the Christ, and these 7 laws. 2. The stages of the Noble Eightfold Path and these soul potencies. 3. The 8 means to yoga or union of the soul, and this subtinate of influences. 4. The 10 commandments of the Semitic religion, and these 7 spiritual laws. Students would find it of interest to test their understanding of the esoteric relationships existing between these groups of teaching and see if they can, for themselves, trace the basic meanings. Let us, by way of illustration, trace or indicate the relation between the 7 laws and the 8 means to yoga, because this will give us an illustration of the difference existing between the means to yoga as understood by the average yogi or esotericist, and as they can be understood by the trained disciple or initiate. 1. The 5 commandments, second ray force, the law of magnetic impulse, the universal duty, inclusion, attraction. 2. The rules, fourth ray force, the law of sacrifice. For self-training, I die daily. 3. Posture, sixth ray force, the law of service. A poised attitude to right relations and of right ideals. 4. Pranayama, seventh ray force, the law of the group, of rhythmic progress, of spiritual development. 5. Abstraction, first ray force, the law of repulse. Pratyahara, withdrawal, the repudiation of desire. 6. Attention, third ray force, the law of expansive correct orientation. Response. 7. Meditation, fifth ray force, the law of the lower 4. Right use of the mind. 8. Result, contemplation, complete spiritual detachment. A close study of these relationships will be found suggestive to the disciple and illuminating to the initiate. End of page 181. End of chapter 35.